country. When a queen is a queen, she don't need no cowboy. This is our country. Oh, honey, I can be a queen or I can be a cowboy. Rodeo, rodeo. Oh, this is our country. Rodeo, rodeo. Oh, this is our country.
All right, everyone, welcome. Just give me a moment while I share my screen. Can everyone see the screen here?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you here today. Let's get started. So PDXWIT has events all over Portland and beyond. And we want to take a moment to acknowledge our Indigenous Oregonians, as well as the history and legacy of racism and settler colonialism. PDXWIT recognizes the ongoing violence, trauma, erasure of Indigenous communities face and is part of the settler colonial structures, and we are actively fighting against it. Portland is located on the traditional land and village sites of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapayuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We endeavor to have this be more than just words. The tech industry is building the future of our world. It's up to us to ensure that this is a future for all. To find out more about how we are supporting the future of Indigenous communities, please visit the link posted in the chat. Hazel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for PDXWIT Presents Path to Leadership within the LGBTQ plus community. Appreciate you joining us. And as you can see, I am the executive director, and I'm really screwing this up. Just kidding. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Crystal, who's going to talk about.
Yeah, myself.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Hazel. Crystal. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Manager of Workplace Experience, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Approved and Extero Company. Hazel and I have been working on the LGBTQ plus event series and programming for PDXWIT for a couple of years now. And we are super excited to bring you our guests today. And before we get started, I would like to let everyone know that we recently created an LGBTQ plus in tech Slack channel in the PDXWIT Slack, and I hope you can join us there for discussion and support. This week is Trans Week of Visibility and Action. Now more than ever, we need to stand up and show up for our trans community. According to the ACLU, there are more than 430 anti-LGBTQ plus bills in work in the US, and 7 of which are right here in Oregon, and this must stop. Please demand our lawmakers vote no to healthcare bans and educate family and friends on the importance of gender-affirming care. Say no to drag, curriculum, and bathroom bans. If you would like to contribute to an organization that helps affect change in our state, please check out Basic Rights Oregon. Both Hazel and I have not only donated there, but we volunteer for them as well. So there's lots of opportunities. The rights of LGBTQ plus community are human rights. Stay strong, everyone. All right. So PDXWIT's mission is to build a better tech industry by creating access, dismantling inequities, and fueling belonging. Events like this are one way we advance our mission, and you can learn more about our work, how to get involved, as well as how to support PDXWIT at pdxwit.org. Let's take a look at our agenda for today. We are currently in the welcome and announcements, and our panel will begin at about 12:10. We'll open up to Q&A around 12:40, 12:45, and we'll close things up by 1 p.m. We have a few upcoming events in April to look forward to. We have the Pitch Fest for Women Founders hosted by Oregon Venture Fund. Our April happy hour will focus on pathways to privacy and security and be hosted in person at Radar First. And near the end of the month, we'll have a volunteer appreciation and recruitment event. Stay tuned for the location. You can visit our PDXWIT events page for more information and registration details by following this QR code. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Hazel for some announcements.
Folks, PDXWIT couldn't be who they are without the help of mentors and volunteers throughout this state and actually and beyond. We are currently and actively looking for mentors as we have a deficit for mentors with a lot of mentees waiting in the wings. I would love to cut that wait time down from 3 months to at least 1 month. And for volunteers, we have several positions. Actually, what I'd like to do is what I've opened it up to is volunteering in all capacities for PDXWIT so that our longtime volunteers can take a break and take a little sabbatical and pass the baton on to the next batch of volunteers who are willing to help us. Lastly, the QR code that you see on the screen is a QR code with regards to this event. And we take the survey so that we are able to report on it in our impact report annually, as well as report on it for the grants we go after for our organization. And with that, I am actually going to turn it over to our sponsor and the person representing for them, Convergence Networks. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's events. Jack, I'm turning the mic over to you.
Right. Thank you, Hazel. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks everyone for participating today. We are a longtime partner and sponsor of PDXWIT and have appreciated every opportunity to engage and provide support in the organization driving its mission. A little bit about Convergence Network. So many years ago, we created an exercise internally to define our why. What are we about? How do we do it? And how do we help our customers? And really honed in on the why of being about people. And so our organization is really intended to be a support and service-based entity that with our focus on people, not only ours internally, but also the people that we serve and our customers. The business has grown dramatically in the last 4 years. And really, when we look at people, we look at the value structure that we all live by. How do we engage with one another? How do we engage with our customers? And how do we engage in teamwork building and all of those things? And so for us, who you are is incredibly important, but also alignment on values. And so for us, we use the acronym GREAT. To be a great company, to be a great person, to be a great service experience. And that centers around growth, relationships, existing clients first, accountability, and teamwork. And with those 5 pillars in our foundation of our company's values, we've been able to take advantage of opportunities to increase roles internally, develop leadership roadmaps and growth opportunities, develop structured business growth individually for each person in the organization through the support of our HR team, and really expand what we do as a company and how we do it. Starting out in Oregon, just 3 or 4 years ago, we were just here in the Portland metro area. But as many of you have probably seen and experienced throughout the COVID, sort of post-COVID and in-person things, a lot of stuff changed in business. And so just about our timeline, we merged with a company out of Canada and became an international business in 2021, which was part of our peer group. We acquired a company in Michigan and we acquired another company in Seattle. And so today our business is really focused on being North America's first people-centric managed IT and cybersecurity partner. And we're looking for people to fill the roles that we have, being intentional about where we look and how we look for those individuals, implemented a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging group. And I've been very intentional about trying to make sure we put the right people in the right seats for the roles. And so we have a pretty broad spectrum of technology roles we can provide and openings across all of North America. Our technology services team is really focused on kind of the service, the delivery, and the experience the customer has when they phone in or they need help with something. Our network operations center is a little bit more behind the scenes. They're the individuals that do a lot of our scripting and automation, work with our tools so that things that we need to be done at customers on a day-to-day basis behind the scenes, sort of like a nervous system, are done, and those are executed effectively. Our professional services group are the folks that deliver special projects, infrastructure upgrades, cloud migrations, security enhancements, and things of that nature on a project basis, and they work from all over the US. Our business services group is around our virtual CIOs, our virtual chief information security officers, and our client success managers, and a little bit of inside sales. And we have a lot of openings for those roles here in the next couple of months as we continue to expand. Our security operations center is focused around the growth opportunities that are impacting businesses every single day with cybersecurity threats. And our consulting and assessment team is really around making sure companies protect that business, reduce their risk, and continue to grow in a safe and effective way, along with maintaining cybersecurity and compliance roles. And so we have a pretty broad swath of things that could be fit for your skill sets, and we'd love to hear from you in the next week or two. If you're looking for opportunities and openings, please reach out. I can provide some additional contact information if you're currently looking for a role and you find something that fits with what we have open right now. We'd love to work with you.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to hear about all of those open roles. If you would like to reach out to Jack, you can direct message him here to find out more information. Before the panel introduction, I want to let you know we will be doing a short audience Q&A at the end of the event today if time allows. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat or raise your hand. We have folks monitoring the chat. So today we have three amazing folks with us to share their stories and some of the tips and tricks they've used to be successful in their power positions today. I know I feel powerful when I know I have my community beside me. Hayes, what about you?
I feel pretty powerful when I know that I can reach out to my own personal board of directors. So these are folks who are either part of my mentor team and or part of my hype man team, because we always need the hype man to make sure they're amplifying who we are.
Right, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we need. I need more hype all the time. We're going to start by having each of our panelists share your name, your pronouns, your title, and what makes you feel powerful. Belinda, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm Belinda Runkle. I'm a director of engineering for serverless at Google Cloud. So for me, self-care is the foundation for feeling powerful. It's sleeping enough, eating right, walking, setting work boundaries, spending meaningful time with family. Those are all the things that sort of fill me and enable me to feel powerful. Should we pass to Britt?
Yeah, I'm happy to go next. Hi, y'all. My name is Britt. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior manager, Scrum Master at Huddle. And the thing that makes me feel powerful is knowing that I never have to do this alone. Y'all mentioned having a good hype squad, and I have a bunch of amazing folks in my hype squad, and a couple of those folks are here today. Let's see, Jennifer, what about you?
Hi, really excited to be with all of you. I'm Jennifer Tweedy, she, her. I'm currently the Executive Director of Governance at Arizona State University Enterprise Technology. And what makes me feel powerful is building teams and community with other passionate people, values aligned. I believe that really amazing things happen when you have the right people engaged around things that they believe in, trusted people oriented to a vision in the language of values that we share.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I think it's so important that shared value with each other, right? So this is my favorite part, the power of sharing our stories. And Belinda, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit how your journey started?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to. So I don't have a traditional software engineering background. I actually studied art and a little bit of anthropology in school. And so my personal entry into tech was actually through customer support first. I did support for insurance, basically talking to Medicare customers, things like that. Not even tech support, but it opened the door for me to be able to get into tech support. So I was able to take on a role as a contractor for Microsoft. And this was like a really short window. So I did tech support for maybe about 8 months, something like that. And then job hopped through kind of a handful of IT roles before I joined my first startup. And I was at my first startup for about 9 years in total, which was much longer than I expected at the time. It's funny, like when I went to the first interview, I was so green in this industry. I just like hung out in their office, basically kind of gently asking like, hey, is there like something that I could do that I could help with? Even if I didn't get the job that I was interviewing for. I think the job at the time was like a database administrator or something like that. And I was too green to know, like, you just don't really do that in an interview. But interestingly, like they did end up giving me a job. And it was, in retrospect, it was probably the worst engineering job in the building, where I'm just like dealing with like piles of errors and logs and just all this like cruft that engineering just didn't have the time to deal with. But actually my lack of experience was somehow a great benefit for me. I didn't have these sort of pre-existing expectations about how things were supposed to be. So I tended to be, pretty open-minded about, problem solving and kind of coming up with sort of ugly but good enough solutions that could unblock the business. And I was also good at just like working with people. So when there was a problem or a new initiative or something was blocked, I was always that person that could kind of bring people together, figure out how to solve the problem, rally support, do all of the things. And so like that leadership element is really the thing that propelled me a lot further in my career, far more than my technical skills did. I was always having to work on my technical skills continuously through my whole career. My engineers would sometimes comment that I was always like running around with a book in my hand. This was pre-Kindle, of course, which was true. Like I was always either taking a class or reading or studying, because it was really important for me. And at the time, I think I felt like a deep imposter syndrome. Like I just didn't know enough. I couldn't possibly know enough. And, wanted to get better at doing my job, but also get better at leading people in a craft that I was frankly still learning. So given my lack of formal tech education, that self-learning became probably the most important part of my early career. I took a lot of courses, so it's not to say there was no formal learning. I just didn't go through the whole college route, at least not for that. I did community college, I did tech courses, I did online courses, I read a lot, exercises, and my coding skills to start, were pretty procedural, right? It was like writing lots of SQL scripts and building reports, eventually kind of automating tasks in Visual Basic. But the industry eventually sort of moved to C# as one of the major languages. And so I kind of stepped up and learned C# and ASP.NET, learned to build web applications. But even still, I wasn't a great engineer before I had to become a manager. I'd argue I wasn't even a good engineer before I had to become a manager. And so I had to learn to hire and lead people who were much better than me, much better than I would probably ever be as an engineer, which, in some ways was really humbling. But it certainly kind of set my mindset of, I don't have to be the best engineer in the building. I don't have to be the best engineer on the team to be able to lead people. Ultimately, the growth of the business and the sort of cycles of boom and bust just drove a lot of changes in the business. And, that included things like a window of like continuous layoffs, kind of like what we're seeing in the market today. And, at the time, those layoffs for me were very scary. They're very scary for all the people that were there and that were involved. But I'm looking back, it actually created a lot of opportunity for me. Seasoned engineers, engineering leaders, were starting to kind of flee in droves, or, maybe they were certain projects that they didn't want to stoop to do. Whereas I, with my, still greenness, was kind of willing to sort of dig in and figure things out and try to move things forward. And so for me, that 9 years was a pretty tremendous career growth for me. I didn't have the same job even every year of that 9 years. I eventually took over engineering roughly halfway through, kind of at that midpoint during my time there, which I would tell you was a big surprise for everyone, including myself. Sponsorship was really pretty key for me. I had, really a lot of support from my direct manager, my bosses, CEO. And looking back, none of this would have been possible without like their endorsement and their willingness to take a risk on me. And for me, what did I bring? I think ultimately having a growth mindset in how I approached, engineering and continuous learning and problem solving and working with people is something that I think, looking back, I had that, but I didn't know I had that. I didn't have any appreciation that I had that until much later in my career. And of course, as you sort of move through your career and build more experience, you can't take it for granted that you have that. Actually, I can see other parts of my career where changes happen. I like dug my heels in. Like I didn't have a growth mindset. So this isn't like something that's just automatically omnipresent in all the situations, that we deal with. So it's like fast forward to now. Honestly, I'm still somewhat surprised at my own progress, being at a place like Google, having had the honor to lead at companies like New Relic, These weren't things that I saw for myself when I was first moving into the tech industry. And throughout my career, like I've always been different from the majority of other people that I'm working with, not just my non-traditional background, but like being the only woman, being the only lesbian, being the only multiracial person. I check a lot of boxes, and not all those boxes are visible, but some of them are, and the visible ones certainly kind of underline, sort of highlight some of the differences in how I see the world and the perspectives that I bring as I work with other folks. I've always been underestimated. It's interesting. No matter what point in my career we're talking about, always been underestimated. So even as I'm making these great progressions, looking back, that I'm proud of. But it was interesting, like over time, the thing that has helped me quite a bit is I worry a lot less about it now than I did at the start. It's kind of like telling a fish about water, right? It's not to say it's not there, that I never worry about it. I just don't pay as much of attention to it anymore. Like I just, go do the thing, create excellent results, acknowledge there's always going to be doubters. There always are doubters. But the important thing has been like finding my supporters, finding my sponsors, and trying to have some fun with it. Go bet on some underestimated people while I'm there. I think that's super important. And I hope, everyone as they move through their own career understands the advantages and opportunities that they've been given, and also look to pay it back or pay it forward. I think that's super important. Anyway, I know we have lots of other stories to hear from besides mine. Britt, can you tell us yours?
Yes, I'd love to. So, hey y'all, my name is Britt, and a couple things you should know about me is I love dogs. I have two. I am currently writing a queer mystery novel, and I absolutely love UNC basketball. And March is a little bit of a tough time in our house. That really connects back to where my journey kind of all began, which was at UNC. I'm a first generation college student, and that was a really big journey for me, navigating what that was like. But also before that, I was homeschooled, and I also started college when I was 17. So I was absolutely not ready and ended up having a lot of difficulties with mental health issues. And luckily for me, Carolina did offer services to start exploring what medication and therapy could look like. But that's something that's a really huge part of my identity and my journey. So I wanted to start there. Carolina also gave me that, but gave me a degree in psychology, and also gave me an experience to study abroad, which eventually led me to where I did my master's, which was on intercultural communications. And my master's thesis was actually on drag queen identity construction. So how did I end up in tech with that non-tech background? I love people, and I love solving problems with people. And so I actually first interviewed at my very first company to be in a customer service role as well. And I didn't get the job. They said, there's probably no way I could sit down long enough to answer the phone. And they were right. And they actually recommended that I apply for a business analyst role. And so that ended up being my foot in the door, and it allowed me to work with people to help solve problems, which ended up leading me down the path of being a Scrum Master. And it also gave me an opportunity to work alongside some other amazing women in tech. I always thought throughout my life that I wasn't smart enough. I don't feel like I'm particularly good at math. I took one computer science class in college and passed barely. And so I never really thought that there was a place for me in tech, even though I always loved it. But I worked alongside some amazing women and some amazing folks who really showed me that women belong in tech, and we're here to stay. After that job, I transitioned to a couple of new industries, which was a little bit nerve-wracking. And for someone who has imposter syndrome, that flared up pretty bad. And I eventually landed in a fintech role where I was doing some business analysis work for them. And there was a new product person that started. And when she first started, I immediately was super jealous of her. I'm like, man, Heather's competition. This woman's so great. And at one point I realized I'm either going to have to be Heather's best friend, or I'm going to continue hating Heather and not learn anything from her. And so Heather actually is one of my best friends, and I ended up leaning on her a ton in that role and learning so much from her. So that actually taught me a great lesson to sometimes take a step back and think about your relationships with other folks. And that was completely on me, and that was on my own insecurity. And Heather ended up helping me pack my desk the day I was laid off. And she ended up being the person who I still, ask questions to even now in my career. Also around this time, speaking of imposter syndrome, I was in a long-term heterosexual relationship and I realized I was bisexual. And that was interesting to navigate. But luckily, my now husband, Cliff, was really supportive and amazing. And even though I had his support, I still kind of felt a little bit like a faker. And so that theme is something that I even continue to battle with today. And, I try to take a step back and, try new things and be brave. Like public speaking terrifies me. And I'm also not out in my network until today. So I think the imposter syndrome is something that I'm working on, but I try to do things all the time to be brave. The last piece I'm going to cover, one of the struggles that I really went through at my previous company, and still some things that I'm trying to unlearn, is around burnout. I worked at a small startup where we went from a small team of about 10 to a few hundred folks, where I worked on as a single Scrum Master that ended up building an entire Scrum department and scaling that. And so that was a ton of work. But I feel really fortunate that I got to build a team and I met some amazing folks along the way. Eudora, Carissa, those were two of my first hires who really taught me how to empower other people, how to empower especially women, and also to celebrate their wins as my own. And eventually learning that I didn't have to be the smartest person in the room was one of the best gifts I've ever received, because now I can just take a step back and enjoy the ride. We launched a nap together, built a whole department, worked some long hours, but we ended up doing some great work. And even though we did an amazing job, I feel like the road for me there was very long to end up getting a promotion. So that was a little bit disheartening and messed with the imposter syndrome a bit, but I eventually moved away from that role because they moved away from Agile, and I'm in my role now. And really throughout the entire journey, I feel like I'll go back to what I said earlier is I'm here today because of my village. And I think I mentioned 8 folks, but there's so many more folks to thank. And so I would not be doing this right now without them. And I always want to make sure that I'm lifting as I climb with those folks and with the folks around me. So thank you for listening to my heavily abridged story. I will go ahead and pass it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Brett, and bravo to you for your bravery today. That's just absolutely fantastic. These are tough stories to follow. Just such wonderful words. I took a little bit of a different approach to this with some takeaways, some key takeaways for me that I thought might be helpful to others as we all try to navigate our tech journeys as women and as women in the LGBTQ space. As the Executive Director of Governance at ASU's Enterprise Technology, I support the development of our strategic priorities. I build relationships to create shared governance models to align work and decide how we make decisions as a community. I guide the community of practice, including our distributed technology leaders across the ASU colleges and enterprises and units, publish the body of IT policy, steer privacy efforts, along with some very, very talented people in all of these spaces, and am a champion for a privacy for all approach to how ASU centers our learners and builds trust. We also have data governance and regulatory alignment in our portfolio. Prior to ASU's Enterprise Technology, I spent a couple of years with one of our colleges downtown, leading technology and marketing and communications teams. And before that, I was with Hazel for 12 years at the Arizona State Department of Health on the technology leadership team, building diverse teams around web design and development, GIS, digital communications, online community building, photography and video, among some other things. As far as experiences that have really foundationally informed my approach to leadership, athletics is always at the top of that list. I feel that I bring a participatory and a shared governance perspective to my work, and I attribute my experiences in athletics through college to a lot of the things that drive and define me as a leader. Sports teams take high trust, they take dedication, vulnerability, negotiation, competitive spirit, all the ingredients that fold into high functioning teams. As I reflected on my professional trajectory in preparation for this panel, I zeroed in on a handful of insights to share things that have informed my values and approach. And I'm struck by the fact that these things individually are not directly related to being part of an LGBTQ space in tech leadership, but that being a woman in this space in leadership affords additional lenses through which we can all view the unique circumstances we find ourselves in as we advance professionally. Things like empathy and vulnerability, being a part of something larger than our individual selves, modeling the behavior that we want to see, embracing disruption for positive change, the ability to have crucial conversations. Also an innate focus on a diverse and human-centered approach to problem solving and an embrace of belonging. These are all values that we as professionals represent and employ because they are informed by our lived experience. Many of the values that inform my own leadership style have been influenced unavoidably by being out early in my career, by navigating various reactions to that, making a decision early on not to compromise how I presented myself and to try and treat any discomfort from others that bled into their professional relationship as their journey and not mine. So some of those reflections so far, first, the path isn't straight, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You think it's going to be one way, but in actuality it's windy and sometimes a treacherous path. So I would say know yourself and your values and know your value, because there are many times when you're going to need to make a split-second gut level decision, and you need to know that it is delivered from a place of certainty. I've never regretted declining an opportunity for professional advancement because it didn't align with my values. Next, I'd say find a mentor and be a mentor. You do not have to be on this journey alone, and someone else's perspective can be invaluable. And if you think you're not ready to be a mentor, you are ready to be a mentor. When I began serving as a mentor in a couple spaces, I was surprised at what a positive sum game it is. We get more than we give, and you and others will benefit from both roles. The roles complement. You'll become a better mentor from having been menteed, and you'll get more out of your mentor relationship also, or mentee relationship also serving as a mentor. I try always to be in a state where I'm in both of those roles in some capacity concurrently. Relationships is my version of the real estate agents, location. For many executives, a ton of time is spent seeking, building, and maintaining relationships. I'm not afraid to go deep because time spent building trusted relationships is never wasted time. In my current role, leading governance work, it includes a healthy amount of strategy and culture, community building. I can't imagine pulling a group of executives together to propose a shared governance model or design without having spent some time building those trusted relationships, and to most importantly know who the champions for the work are in the room, and making sure that they are at the table together. And I will offer that a commitment to relationships is not forgotten. I wouldn't be surprised if you have new opportunities present seemingly out of the blue from past relationships for your entire career. Next, I'd say embrace ambiguity. This is it's okay not to know yet, and it's okay to experiment, to fail and to keep trying until something works. This is something that I wish that I had embraced earlier in my career. Iteration and a minimum viable product, they help solve for ambiguity. We're all making database decisions every day, but trusting your gut to a point to steer you in the right direction to get some design thinking going is sometimes all that you need to get past that. I would say sit with ambiguity and get comfy with it, and try to turn that discomfort into inquiry. I say on vulnerability rather than be vulnerable, because this is a really personal place for many of us. An approach that has been forefront for me as I see inclusion in leadership evolving is, and I think this is also a differentiator. It's our ability and practice of vulnerability. When teams have leaders that they see embrace vulnerability, leading by example, they themselves feel empowered to take a healthy risk, to try, to fail, to try again, to succeed, and then to iterate upon those successes. I think that a practice of vulnerability sets the table nicely for building high functioning teams. It happens through trust and transparency, shared values, respect, and vulnerability is not always the easiest of practices, I know, but committed to may really lead you to a true inflection point. And finally, I'll close with be a voice for those not in the room. Organizations flourish when they encourage and support diversity. And as LGBTQ leaders, you might be the only person in the room, like yourself. I'm not proposing that we take it upon ourselves to speak for everyone else who may be like us, but you can represent diverse thinking and perspectives, and you can make space for other voices to be added to that conversation. We can foster that inclusion through the behavior that we model to those who may not yet embrace a diversity consciousness, and that takes courage, and it takes a healthy amount of vulnerability. Crystal, I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you, Jennifer, for all of those great points. I think it's so important to really consider. I love what you were just talking about being a voice for those who aren't in the room, and making space for those voices to join you. So thank you so much, Jennifer. We now have a few moments, everyone, for some Q&A. Have any questions come through in the chat, Emily?
We have.
Oh, yay.
There is one from Marin, and it's a question to Belinda, or for all the panelists, excuse me. Belinda touched on visible and non-visible identities. I'm curious about what role representation played in your ability to see or not see yourself in a leadership role. Let's start with Belinda.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be naive to think that it didn't make a difference. And I can reflect on my own career, and actually there's sort of maybe three main chapters. In the first chapter, when I was coming into tech, in some ways there was actually more representation, particularly for women in the industry. So I had a female engineering manager, a QA manager, like other senior leaders, people who were more senior than me were in that industry. And so even just as a percentage, like I saw other folks in leadership roles, even though they may not have been like occupying the level I was at or even above me, but they were there and they were omnipresent. And even reflecting on some of my most senior engineers, one of them had been in the industry. I mean, she was probably in her mid 60s, heading towards 70s, had been in software back when they were doing punch cards, and she was like a matriarch for me in my career. Looking through those other chapters, the middle chapter, a lot of startup stuff, I would tell you, not nearly as much representation. If anything, I felt quite alone. And then in the third chapter, as I kind of moved into sort of more leadership roles at places like New Relic and Google, probably the biggest thing that made a difference for me was actually having real women in leadership that were occupying VP and up roles that were able to act as sponsors and mentors and role models. So it wasn't a question of just like, could I or could I not be in leadership, but like, what did it mean to actually show up in these spaces? Like, how do I even present myself? How do I try to behave like a man and sort of talk like a man in certain meetings, right? So I think a lot of the sort of social cues I think that we get on how to show up as a leader, we get them from the people that we observe. And so if you are only observing people who are not like you or who operate in a different way than you, then it's very natural that, one, you don't see yourself in them, and two, you actually start to emulate the behaviors that they bring in terms of leadership. And so for me, it's actually really important to have personal relationships with other women that I could look up to. And it's interesting, there's never been a single person that kind of represented the cross section of all of my identities. And so I kind of have to sort of latch on to the goodness that I see, across, multiple role models, whether it's because they were, gay or, different race than the majority or woman, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of picking and choosing from the best of what inspired me and using that to reflect on like how I show up as a leader is kind of the way that I've approached it.
That is great. I will say, and Jennifer doesn't know this, when I started working at Department of Health Services, I felt like a fish in a very big pond of people, and I didn't know how to identify. And when I met Jennifer, actually when I had a project and Jennifer had to be there because I was going to touch on government IT stuff. And she walked in the room. I'm like, oh, finally, somebody I can talk to. Not that you're 100-footer by any means, Jennifer. It's just more that I'm like, all right, a powerful woman in the room that I'm going to be able to relate to. Does anyone, Britt, Jen, do you want to speak on, follow up on what that question was and what Belinda said?
Hazel, I'll say that that it was a breath of fresh air to meet you as well, fellow powerful woman. And we got some serious stuff done there. I love it. Britt, I'm sorry, Belinda, when you were talking about your story, your overview of the evolution that you've been through, it really stood out to me. When you said that not all the boxes are visible, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I mentioned that we can be a voice for those not in the room, and encourage other voices to be included. I think that one thing has changed, and where my mind went as you were talking through that, Belinda, is authenticity, and just how important it is for us to bring our authentic selves to work if we're comfortable. I think there's a different setting, a different table setting now for authenticity that hasn't maybe been there over the past decades. And I think one of the things that I've been encouraged to see us as communities and organizations focus more on is the appreciation of those representations, of the diversity and the strength of what we're able to accomplish when we embrace diversity in all its forms, from our experiences, how we represent outwardly, how we might represent that those boxes that are not visible, as you put it. And I think that one of the keys there, I know it's been a key for me in my own growth and development of a diversity consciousness, is listening, just being quiet and listening to other people's stories, because you always learn something and you always gain a different perspective, and there's always a more diverse landscape that's developed that evolves out of those conversations that everyone benefits from.
How about you, Britt?
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience to everyone that's spoke up so far. I feel like definitely having a role model in my first job was very, very crucial, because between then and now, I have not had any female bosses, leaders, anyone who identified in any way other than a cis hetero white man. Who by and large been very lovely. But the feeling of sitting in a room of 20 men and being the only woman and the only person who identifies as LGBTQ, and it doesn't make your role invalid because you're still doing the work of a leader, but it also is complicated because sometimes those folks are growing leaps and bounds over you. And so the representation that I've seen is many women, folks of color, diverse folks don't usually get to the top. It's not been my experience. And I think we all kind of touched on imposter syndrome a little bit. And I think it's interesting that we feel imposter syndrome when the world is constantly telling us that we're less than. So it's something that I've really been trying to not internalize and take a step back a little bit. And I'm hoping that, you know, with all of the strong women and folks of color and, you know, diverse folks, that we're able to create a better and more bigger representation for the folks that come after us.
Thank you. Other questions? I'm looking. I've got one that was kind of set before. Here's a good one, and this is going to be a really fun one for you all to answer. What do you wish you would have known when you were first starting out that you know now? I think for me, I will answer that with trusting myself. That's probably been the hardest because things like imposter syndrome really, really kicks in. Belinda.
For me, I mean, given what I talked about with learning, I'd say I wish I'd known, like, this industry is moving just way too fast for anyone to actually gatekeep or build a moat around their knowledge. So I tell folks, like, don't worry about knowing the most. Instead, like, focus on being the fastest learner. Because like every 5 years or so, we're going to see these like big upticks and advancements. Like, you know, today that's AI, right? It's a nascent field, but like the acceleration of capabilities mean it's going to create like new categories of solutions and problems and technologies to learn and all that. And like that reality is like pretty exciting if you love technology. It also means that you shouldn't get too attached with what you know now or what you knew yesterday, because it's going to expire pretty quickly. So keep learning.
Britt.
Yeah, I think for me, what stands out is the power of asking questions. I think about this in a few ways, and one of which being I sometimes will ask questions instead of saying no, because in my position, asking good questions is just as powerful and it's less off-putting when you need to push back. It also is helpful to stay curious and to keep learning. So keep asking folks questions and being invested in what other folks are saying. And the last one is just a tactical piece that I give whenever I do chats with new grads or do like behavioral interview boot camps or things. And the power of asking questions in job interviews. I think that we touched on this a little bit earlier with you, Jennifer, but you mentioned like know the values of the folks around you and don't take opportunities that don't align with them. I wish that I asked some really hard questions in job interviews, and I might have saved myself a little bit of grief by ending up at places that were not right for me.
Jen.
Yeah, I touched on a little earlier with the ambiguity piece. I wish that I had practiced that, getting comfortable with holding that uncomfortable space, turning discomfort into inquiry earlier in my career, because you know we're all targeting, or trying to solution toward and achieve what we've carved out, but we've got to be at the same time concurrently carving out what's next, and so you have to be able to hold, that uncomfortable space. Belinda, you said something that really resonated with me. You don't have to be the best, X at something in order to lead people. And I believe that wholeheartedly, because, as long as we're building strong teams, and trusted teams, aligned around the values that we commonly hold, we're going to be able to accomplish amazing things. Like you, Belinda, my head's in the AI space, generative AI space right now. And, I think that, we don't have to be fingers on keyboards designing, databases that are flowing into a generative AI model in order to, talk to people about solutioning, technology as an accelerator from everything from, the community impact space and social embeddedness. And I mean, we don't have to own the entire landscape of the space that we're interested in order to know, to be able to identify rather who the champions are, build those trusted relationships, and align people value-based around solutions. So
All right, we have a question comes in, and it kind of it's a good segue to this question, and it's a two for folks, and then I'm going to ask Britt to start first. What is your advice to job seekers looking for a company that aligns with their values? And second, what questions or tactics have worked for you to help confirm taking a job is the right move for your growth and your well-being? So either question.
All right. I might try to tackle both quickly. I just took on a new job about 6 months ago. And when I was interviewing, instead of asking what the company values are, I already looked them up ahead of time. And I would ask folks, can you tell me a time that you've seen this in action? And I think that people in interviews usually have kind of a script, and they know the company values, but like to be able to speak to how the values actually show up and to be able to come up with that on the spot, I think is really, it speaks to that the values are real. So that's something that I try to use in interviews. And knowing if a job is going to contribute to long-term well-being, I usually try to think about what I want most in the next step of my career. And either that's leaning in, working more, learning a skill, leaning out, so I have more work-life balance, or if I want mentorship or community, and just think about, like, you probably will have a lot of jobs, but like, what is the thing that you need the most immediately? And for me, that was right now mentorship and community. So that really led my decision for the job that I took a few months ago.
How about you, Jennifer?
I ask lots of culture questions, and I ask them in lots of different ways, because these people that are working with you to see if you're the right fit for the organization are the people that you ought to be interviewing about whether you're the right fit for the organization. And I think that if the people that you're talking to in that space are happy, if you get that they're supported, in their try, fail, succeed, iterate process, you might be as well. I'd also just mention that if you do take a role that is ultimately misaligned, you're going to know it. You're going to know it right away. And if you're in the wrong culture, if you're in the wrong community, and you're not going to be supported, realizing the passion around your values, you will not be happy. Don't stay. We all find ourselves there, and it's like, oh, what's that going to look like on a veto? What's that going to look? We all have hiccups, and they can, and I think should be intentional when we find ourselves in a place where maybe something was billed that isn't so. Don't be afraid to act and react and course correct, because your growth depends on it. And finding those people that align again with the values that you hold is pivotal in your own success.
Crystal, your hand's up. What's up?
Oh, no. I just wanted to make sure we got in our last question for the day. We're running towards the end. So I wanted to find out from each of our panelists, what's the final thing you would like our audience to be left with, to think about what you've said today, or in terms of their career, or that. Why don't I start with Belinda, since you can answer on the last question?
Sure. So adaptability is a really big part of building resilience in our careers. And, even for me, it's just managing the emotional part of work. But like the moment that we need to change and adapt is usually when things are most scary. So they call this the adaptability paradox. That sounds very fancy, but it's this fact that, like, when we need to learn and change, actually that's when we tend to stick with what we know and to do the safe thing, which stifles our learning. So it's been helpful for me to kind of think about my career as like surfing. So climb on the biggest wave I can, ride it until I get thrown off, and I'm going to get thrown off at some point, and then just jump on the next big wave. And if I found myself like overly comfortable, consider throwing myself off and finding a bigger wave. And what enables me to do that is, having an emergency fund so I can tread water between the waves. So I don't settle for the wrong wave, right? The one that, doesn't grow me or that's boring or whatever. So just know that there's way too much opportunity out there to stick with the wave you're comfortable with, or even to get on a bad wave for too long. And just because it's scary doesn't mean it's bad. Scary is just scary. It may be an awesome wave for you.
Britt.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway here would be to find balance. I feel like throughout my career, I've leaned into community. I keep talking about community, but that really is so vital for me. There's folks that I work with all the time that if I'm not good at something, I lean on them. I like to, offer my skill set to other folks, and really coming up with the best product and coming up with, the best ultimate solution. I've always felt like, teamwork is super key. So whether or not that's like in your personal life, knowing who your anchor is, or at work, someone who is really good at executing, who can get that document over the line, just identifying those strengths and weaknesses, and then partnering with people who make you your best you.
Jen.
Something stuck out to me, resonated a lot. Belinda, you were talking about self-care and the importance of it. And I would say that we are only, as good to others around us as we are to ourselves. And if we're not focusing on self-care and building our own resiliency bank, we can't allow others, those that we support, to tap into it.
Thank you, Crystal. Where are we at?
Thank you everyone for sharing today. I really want to thank our panelists for being here. We appreciate your time and your energy and your thoughtfulness and your answers. I want to thank Jack at Convergence for your continued sponsorship, and our pro bono ASL interpreters, Juniper and Selena, for their services today. Thank you, thank you. And lastly, we'd like to thank you, our community, for being here today. A community is my core value, and I couldn't do anything that I do without the support of you. Like so many of our panelists have said, it's really important to have that network and those people around you who believe in you and will talk about you when you're not in the room in a good way, and really move us forward. So thank you for being here today. Hazel, anything to add?
And with that, just remember, leadership involves impact. Know what happens on both sides of the coin as you create decisions, create teams, and make sure that those values align with what you're trying to do in your career and opportunity. From all of us here at PDXWIT, thank you so much for being here and being a part of this panel. Appreciated it. Love seeing some old colleagues, seeing people in the chat being engaging. Britt, Belinda, love your stories. Thank you for your vulnerability. And with that, have a great rest of the week, everyone.
Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.